Hello everyone and welcome on to Beyond Watch. Welcome on the show. Today I'm with the one and only Gary Guetz. Maybe some of you knows him already for his very beautiful picture that he's available on his Instagram page. But it's not only known about that. There is also his expertise about the watchmaking industry, all the indies watchmakers. So he is here today to share his story, his life, his expertise. But first of all, Gary, welcome on the show. And could you please introduce yourself?
Well, thanks. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks to all the people who are watching. I assume you're out there, so it's good to be here, and I appreciate the invitation. As you say, I'm Gary Guetz. I am a watch enthusiast. I guess, you could call me a collector, although that's a term I like a little less, because you don't really have to buy watches to love watches. That said, I do have an assortment of watches and pretty substantially focused on independent watchmakers. I'm a retired business strategist and management consultant of many years standing, former CEO of a boutique strategy and innovation consulting firm, an author, published author of a business book and a bunch of articles. And on the watch side, for many years, I've contributed articles to the site Quill and Pad. As you mentioned, I've got my Instagram page, which I'll plug, Gary G_1, number one, and I hope people enjoy the photos there. I've been a juror for the Grand Prix de Genève. I'm now on the Academy of the Grand Prix. I live in California, travel a lot for watches, have moderated this year panels at the Singapore Watch Fair and Dubai Watch Week, among others, go for the auctions, and have a lot of friends, great friends that I've made in the watch hobby. And aside from watches, my wife is a veterinarian, which generally gets a positive response from people because they love animals, and she takes care of them. And my other big hobby is riding horses. I'm a somewhat competitive dressage rider.
And is it possible to see on your Instagram page that you mentioned, or maybe on another one, not very public, pictures of yourself riding horses?
Yes, once in a while in my Instagram stories, I'll put something horse related because I can be confident it'll vanish in 24 hours. But my Facebook, which is more, first of all, no one's on Facebook anymore, I guess, who's under the age of 100. But on there, it's mostly it's a private page for my friends, and there's a lot more horse related content.
And what's your best watch to wear while riding a horse? Is it your Recepi or something else?
I have a really good friend, and I don't know if you've met him or not, but he wears everything doing everything. So he has a really nice Dave Bethune that he wears riding his dirt bike, and he skis with all of his watches. I, on the other hand, wear a Brew chronograph typically when I'm taking a lesson. I don't wear a watch, but it shows to keep track of time. I'll wear the Brew because it's incredibly robust and you can read it really easily. So it's very straightforward. I have a G-Shock that sometimes I wear, but then you have to kind of stare at your wrist and figure out what time it is. So the one with the hands is easier for me.
Yeah. And how did you discover all those indies watchmaker or brands?
I and a bunch of friends were really lucky back in the early 2000s. There's a guy named Tim Jackson who was here in Northern California, subsequently moved to Southern California. But he and his wife had this small watch and jewelry store locally, and he was fanatical about the independents. And so it was sort of the place you'd go on a Saturday to meet your watch buddies and hang out. And he had some major brands, but he had these kind of odd, quirky watches from independent makers. And then he hosted several events where he would fly over people like Marco Long and Kari Voutilainen and Vianney Halter and the McGonigal brothers, Peter Speak, and we get to meet them all, and I'm sure we'll come back to this at some point. But once you meet the people and meet the makers, you want the watches, and so that was really the start. And so it was a great gift, really, to get involved in that scene moderately early, and then. Again, in those days, there were the forums that were quite active, and on a thing called the Purists, there was an AHCI, an independence page, and people from around the world gathered there virtually and exchanged ideas and put up, grainy pictures of their watches, and and you had a conversation about, hey, I discovered so and so, and well, what are they about? And so that really was a place where I met first virtually people who today I still see in person, at events around the world.
Would you say that your passion for, watches or in these brands, in these watchmakers we can define it by the human side of it, saying my passion for watches is more related to the people than the watch itself?
Yeah, it's almost a cliche that but it's a saying that I say a lot, right? There are watches involved, but it's all about the people, right? Yeah. It just, and the watches are fantastic, and I love watches, don't get me wrong, but really, and even with the major brands, at Lange, to know Tony DeHaas, who's their, director of development, and to understand what he's working on, or Christian Salmoni at Vacheron, these big companies, you get to know people as well, but with the independents, it's a very personal relationship. And then with the enthusiast friends, that you go and you have discussions and you look at things and you visit people and you form these tight bonds, it's very, very much a human experience.
About those people, we can say that you've been working with Indies watchmaker for many years now by writing about them, showcasing their product, by being in touch with them, being in touch with other collectors. Can you tell us about its beginnings in the early 20s, 2000?
Well, yeah, for me, that was the beginning. Earlier than that, of course, in the beginning, there was George Daniels, right? And, he didn't make very many watches, very small number. And my understanding is basically he made them for people he knew. Yeah. Right. So it wasn't that he had a brand or that he was selling watches like, I know you and I'm going to make you a watch. And he was crazy enough to do it, right? And also had the gift and the diligence to study and develop and write. And then Dufour, then came Dufour, and he decided that, he didn't like making watches for other companies, and he went off on his own. And, in those days, that was very much, who knew who. And, by the time I got to it, a little over 20 years ago, it was more developed, but not hugely more developed. I mean, it was really kind of an insider thing. Again, we had the good luck of knowing someone who knew and had gone and visited these people and could bring them to us. That was, the motivation there was very much about meeting cool people who were doing really interesting things. And also, I think very much about something that wasn't in the mainstream, right? In those days, to buy an independent watch, you had to have a pretty strong sense of confidence about your taste and that you're going to spend, $3, $5, God forbid, $10,000 on a watch by someone completely unknown because they had described their process to you and what they were trying to express and how they did it. And it was, that part was cool. And also the fact that you weren't going to see it on everybody else's wrist was a significant part of the appeal.
And also, can you tell us about what type of watches collectors were looking for at the time? And when you look at today, do you see an evolution in that needs or what people are looking for?
It is kind of interesting. Now that you asked the question, it's because at the time, I guess my initial thought would be, well, in those days, the watches were mostly pretty simple. Yeah. You had Peter Speak, who was buying an ETA movement and modifying it and modifying the winding system and putting it in his distinctive case with an enamel dial and heat blued hands. And that was an independent watch. And I owned a number of those. But at the same time, someone like Martin Braun, even then was making an equation of time and sunrise sunset watch, right? Yeah. The EOS watch.
Quite different.
Quite different. Yeah. Quite a different display of the equation and the sunrise and sunset. And Vianney, of course, with the Antiqua, with Jeff Barnes, that's a semi-instantaneous perpetual calendar. But that I think those were not the watches, at least the people that I was hanging out with. Those were considered a little too outrageous. Even someone like Alan Silberstein, who was active in those days with his same sort of visual style. I was like, wow, that's kind of wacky. So, something like a Marco Long, for instance, working in a very traditional style. I think people, were comfortable with those watches. The Antiqua was considered to be this huge, a lot of people
quite impressive for the moment. Yes, between a Marco Lang and a Vianney Alter Antiqua. It's not the same design at all. It's not the same spirit. And maybe back in the days, people were more inclined to have those traditional watches than maybe today. People are more liberated, saying, yeah, I love the design. It fits with my spirits. So let's get one.
Yeah, I mean, today, so maybe it's not a matter so much of complication, although maybe it is, and maybe I'll speak about that in a minute. But you look at MB&F or Urwerk or some of the De Bethune watches or, and you see these really dramatic styling exercises that are well received, very popular, sought after, and they're people who really specialize their collections on those sorts of watches. Again, in the early 2000s, we had, Max with the Opus series, and there was the Opus 3 with Vianney, which is a watch I always wanted, never bought, could never afford. But it was always that thing, I could sell everything I own and buy one, but it's just, I never could quite get over the hump. It was always just a little too outrageous. I'm going to end up owning 3 watches. Is that going to be, the one? So I think now there is, more of an acceptance of dramatic styling. And I think also now there's a big emphasis on finishing quality. If you look at Recep or Peterman and Badat, or the first series, at least from Simon Brett, and of course, Dufour really led the way in this, extraordinarily high quality hand finishing, that's a priority for people now, I think, more than before. And then kind of inventive or revitalized complications. So Peterman and Badat, they revived an 1800s dead seconds mechanism, which is extraordinarily difficult to make. And basically only they can do it, I think. And, Bernard Lederer So, these sort of novel, maybe, were in pocket watches and are revived, or they were in pocket watches and they never really quite worked. The different kinds of escapements that are being reintroduced. There's a whole interest in that kind of renaissance of really interesting mechanical watchmaking and complication, I think, today that we didn't have any idea of, in 2002.
Which is quite good for today regarding what we can find on the market. And it's really a way for those watchmakers to say, okay, I can be crazy on the design, but also mechanically speaking. And I will be able to find some people crazy enough to buy those crazy watches I want to create. And what do you think makes indies brands or watchmakers so successful today? When we look at the auctions results, but also at the price and all the interest that people are having on those people/brands, what do you think makes them so successful?
It wasn't that long ago, and I keep asking my friends at Philips to find this video, and they haven't, but I don't know, 2017 or 2018, Philips had a panel discussion at their Geneva auction, and it was Arlbach's, the watch auctioneer, and they had a car auctioneer and an art auctioneer. And they were talking about similarities and differences across the categories. And question time came, and I got up my courage, put up my hand, and I asked the question. I said, look, today, with watches seem to be like cars. When you buy a vintage car, you buy a Ferrari or a Porsche. In art, you're buying an artist, right? You're buying Picasso or Mondrian, right? And Mr. Jorn happened to be in the audience. And I said, Mr. Jorn's sitting right there in the third row. Do you think we'll see a time in the watch market where the works of individual artists are as sought after as the works of important companies like Patek? And that wasn't that long ago. No. And the question kind of baffled the panelists. It was kind of an interesting response. I didn't really get an answer to my question, but all of a sudden here we are, right? Yeah. And I think it's there may be two rivers that they join or they flow apart, but one is that with Instagram and ready availability of information, it's just people have discovered the independents. And how great they are, and it's just in the public view. Certainly, there's some dealers and auctioneers who have focused on some of the independents and have promoted them heavily, and that also, I think, has played a role. There are more young makers going independent, and so from the supply side, there's more interesting stuff being made, in many cases by very young people, which is really exciting. And then the second thing is, the money part, which high-end watches, but so who knows at what price levels it'll be here to stay. But right now there's a flight to quality, as there is in a lot of markets when things get soft. I think there will be a shakeout. I think there have been some new makers who are drawn to the market because you can sell out before you even order materials. And as that, softens or goes away, there will be some market contraction, I think, but independent watchmaking is not going away. I mean, there's some people who had really bad timing. That guy Tulloch in New York, who worked with Kari Voutilainen and Comblamine and to make 50 watches, and he was about a year and a half too early. And it never got any traction. And I think they made a few, but he had to give up. And if he'd been 2 years later, he'd be on his third reference now. That's just what happened to the market. But I think, yes, it's here to stay. I think that people are now discerning enough, and there's enough information available, and the discussion is about independence enough. I think. You make a point with your pre-question, which is still now, I think for a lot of people, certainly for me, it's about the creator's process, and it's about who they are. And there was a famous panel discussion at the Purist 10th anniversary in 2011, where a bunch of the independents were there, and Peter Speak was on the panel, and he said, "It drives me nuts. Basically, I have to go everywhere because I am the brand. Yeah. And if I want to have a business at all, I can't send somebody, and you go and you watch Max Buser speak, who's going to represent MB&F and what it is and why it is." Well, Stephen McDonnell, for his part, of course, as the designer constructor, but those are the people, right? Yeah. It's Max on the visionary side, it's Stephen on the creative side, it's Eric on the design side of that brand. Those are the people you want to see and meet. And exactly, yes. I think if they try to hand that off, or it's too much about, look, how I polish this, or, here's a gizmo that does that. Here's how the spring works. I mean, that's all really interesting stuff, but it's, I don't know. I know Fiona Krieger, makes the Skull watches, right? And the other watches, the Chaos watches. And I've had the chance to sit down with her and go through her design book, right? Which is this fantastic, thick scrapbook with newspaper articles and magazine pictures and photographs of her as a child, and, exploding bombs. And, and once you've been through that, I've had that same process with someone who makes pottery, right? Okay. And you'd put those two books side by side, and if you didn't really know, they'd be very hard to tell apart, right? But that's what makes the enthusiasm and the desire to buy happen. For me, and I think for many other people, and if the creators forget that, I think there's a risk for them. I do think that needs to be explained and communicated. And happily, I think a lot of them are, at least in small groups or one-on-one, quite good at it. There are others, who struggle. Watchmaking is in some ways a solitary craft, right? So it's, there aren't a lot of natural marketers, I think, but I think a lot of them, you just meet them and they talk so sincerely about. And
you feel it and say, okay.
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
It's not the most communicative things, but at least I feel it inside me.
Yeah, they're not selling, but you feel it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you are saying that, yes, they have to explain what they are doing and how they are doing it, but they have to find a right balance to not to say not too much in order to keep a part of a mysterious side, because if not, we will know too much about them. And when you met them in person, you say, okay, I was expecting something about you because I saw you so many times through screens, and now I have you in person saying, okay, you could be disappointed. Is that correct?
I'm trying to think of when I've had that experience, and maybe I have, but I find them, these creators to be incredibly genuine and impressive. And, our little group of collectors met Sylvain Pinot this past year, and I liked the watch beforehand, but I wasn't really inclined to buy it, and I just fell in love with the guy. We sat in coffee with him, and we talked and the watch got prettier and prettier and prettier. So I'm rarely, disappointed by them. I think though there are some. Maybe I'll put it in a positive way. If a guy gave unsolicited advice, the premise is that they have something to say. Right? If I'm making the claim that independent watchmaking is an artistic pursuit, artists need to say something.
Yes.
And so, and the thing that they're saying can't be, I think I'll put some gears together and make money. Okay, that can't be the thing. And so, there are people I won't mention, but figures in the watch industry, respected, folks say, geez, every kid now, they're making a watch with a half open dial where you see the keyless works. And to some extent, it's a little bit true, that there are a lot of kind of similar looking watches, with a balance on the front, and there's a sub dial at the top, and you can see the keyless works. And yeah, they're beautifully made, and but on a few occasions when, some up and coming young makers have flattered me by asking for my opinion, it's like, gee, when I look at this, how do I know it's yours?
Yeah.
How do I know this is your watch? And but you look at one of his watches and say, yeah, I get it. I get it. That's his thing. And I don't know, I guess it could get to the level of being kind of a parlor trick where you say, well, look, I can make a watch that does X. But I think maybe there's some of the newer entrants where I think there's a risk that they're not really saying, they're not compelled as much as Dufour was compelled to make his watches, or Vianney, and when there was no money in it at all, just felt that they had to do it. That sense of almost desperation a little bit, as opposed to, I got out of watchmaking school and I've got some good friends and I'm going to make a watch.
Yeah. You have to go deeper than that.
Yeah.
I have one last question for you, Gary, which is, do you have a story to share that left a lasting impression on you and that embodies independent watchmaking and its state of mind?
Yeah, my favorite. I'll cheat and tell you, the short one, which is, anytime you get to visit the atelier of one of these folks, it's marvelous. And, the opportunities that our little group has had to visit Philippe Dufour and his atelier have been magical. That little schoolhouse, and you go in there and he's got the big safe, and he reaches way in the back and he pulls out some Valet de Joux creation from the mid 1800s, and he explains to you why it's important. It just melts your brain and your heart. So that's in terms of, a 2-hour experience that not many people get to have, and that I've been so lucky to have that. I think in terms of a story, when our group of Northern California collectors commissioned Kari Voutilainen to make a set of 6 chronographs with big date and moon phase, that whole process, starting with one of the guys coming to dinner with a picture of a blank brass dial with some holes in it for the date and the moon, and the 6 of us saying, we're in, all the way through specifying the metals and the dial colors and who wanted dots and who wanted triangles and who wanted, two-tone, driving Kari completely nuts. And then, the delays, where this was before he had his dial factory. And there was a year we waited to get 6 dials made and remade. And then in my case, having seen some of his earlier watches, really, really wanting a closed case back with an engraving by Eddie Jacquet, who did the fabulous Jules Verne engravings for MD&F. But this was years before that. And, corresponding back and forth with Kari, because Eddie doesn't talk to anybody. In fact, I've only seen one photograph of him. I've never met him. I've never talked with him. He's really reclusive. But, that whole pride then, and as a group of 6, enthusiasts, how close we got in that process, and working and having our own inputs to Kari and having him come back and saying, well, I think that'll work. I think that won't work. But that sort of customization guided by his vision and expertise was very important. And then the watches came, and, it's talking about limited production. Exactly. He made 10 total. We got 6 unique ones. And there was a little glitch here and there that took maybe, a month or so, back and forth. And now they all work great. But there's that too, that, you're not expecting absolute perfection when it drops into your hand. But it quickly, iterates and becomes exactly what you wanted. And those watches to this day are treasures, and it's one of my very, 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 very favorite watches. And, the experience with him and the experience with my friends and the whole unique experience of going back and forth with the creator, interacting with the creator during the process, makes that an ultimate experience for me.
So nice. Gary, I would like to thank you. I hope the audience understood a bit more about the indies watchmakers, brands, feeling and soul that you lived during all those years. And I hope they enjoy it and learn something. Gary, maybe we will see you later on the show, speaking about maybe other project or the limited edition that you are maybe receiving in the following months, maybe next years. I don't know. It has been a pleasure seeing you, speaking with you, and thanks for your expertise.